no? Ah, corretto. Sono un po' scegliendo poi il cuore. Proviamo il nostro game, proviamo tu.
Magari sul tavolo?
Adesso vuol dire che l'anno si deve prendere
Però c'è quegli italiani che ti aiutano, che si mettono con la testa un po' di lato.
No, 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 vanno bene così.
No, vanno bene così. Così. Così ci mettiamo. Se vuoi metto io per mezzo.
Metti non i passi di nessuno.
Qui.
Adesso è bloccato.
Adesso
è tutto bloccato.
No, 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 adesso va meglio.
No,
Stai facendo
Che poco così, grazie.
Sì, una cattiveria, non è che te ne sei pentito che sei stato zitto sulla Brexit, no? Tu l'hai detto, la fai Like two, huh? Okay, thank you.
Infatti noi parliamo alle 5.
Lui ha detto, infatti, lui ha detto, lui ha detto proprio questo, che c'è una cosa
Coming to the 21st century out.
Stiamo parlando
Non, encore demain. Oui.
Vous voulez pas être devant? Qui va à la chasse aux Alsace? Quand il revient, il voit un gros chien. Je suis gros, je ne suis pas chien.
Je te laisse.
Sorry.
Je la relibère.
Chi fa tu che sappiamo? C'è una relazione, c'è perché io in base alla domanda do il campo.
More or less ready. Okay. So it looks like we have lost one contributor to the Meet the Press. So this is really a follow-up to our two keynote speakers, and they're in the Future of Europe session. And yeah, it's just a Q&A really, on some more, adding some more details, as well as related themes. Who wants to start? Oh, just to mention, this is also live streamed, so we might have press remotely coming in with questions. Any first takers?
Can I start?
Yeah, of course. If you can introduce yourself.
Yes, of course. I'm from the Italian television, like you were, talking about Brexit and healing a divided country. We are joining the club of a very divided country. So I would like to know, what does it mean to you, what churches can do in terms of healing a divided country?
Can I have a simpler question? I think what churches can do is, I mean, the bishop knows that the history of Germany is of healing divided country. And so I want to hear what the bishop has to say, because I suspect she will do better than I will. But I think the key things for me would be first that the churches must set an example among themselves of being honest about differences and yet loving one another, caring for one another and supporting one another. Secondly, they must challenge the political establishment whenever it uses hatred or difference as a way of manipulating its way to power. And thirdly, and probably most importantly, they need to reassert the deep values of our society which have sustained our countries over time. In the case of Italy, through the great traumas of the 1940s, 1930s, 20s, and have enabled recovery and healing in the past. There's a British political philosopher of the 18th century called Edmund Burke, who said the social contract is a covenant between those who've lived in the past, that is tradition, those who are alive today, and those who are yet to be born. We need to reassert that sense of covenant that enables us to come together, and the churches and the faith-based organizations need to do that. But I know that the German church, particularly in the period after 1945, set an extraordinary pattern not only for Germany but for Europe, and also after 1989 in the healing of the society. So I wonder what you think.
Maybe we are on a way of healing memories as well as healing society, but at the same time I have to say, coming from the German background, at the moment we experience that the old wounds are also sometimes open, and that people in East Germany sometimes have the experience of an unjust society, that they have not the same chances as the people in the western part of our country. So it's a long way, I think, when we speak about healing of wounds in our societies. And for me, I can only say we have a long way also in the German society before us, although there is also a long way behind us. But I'm full of hope that there are resources we can find in our Christian faith to do that. We are together. We are not alone. We live from hope and not from fear. We know that reconciliation is possible and that there is a non-violent way to solve problems and to live with differences. So, and also diversity is nothing we have to fear, but something of the wisdom of the creation of our God. So I think we have a special Christian attitude to come near such questions in our society, and maybe it's not the same other people have. So I'm full of hope. There can be more than that.
Better answer than mine.
But divisions is spreading all over the world. So it's divisions and separation and conflict are dividing the number of societies.
Well,
so it's not something of the past, it's a burden of the future.
It's a burden of the future, yes, but part of the reason it looks as though division is all over the world is we know more about it. And we are actually, in terms of violence in the world, fewer people are being killed in wars than in the past. But we are capable of spreading division with these things. We have information but not relationship. And what God did in Jesus Christ was to bring us to the face of God and to give relationship and the possibility of loving not only those who are like us, but those who are unlike us. And I think this is what the bishop was emphasizing. Thank you.
Okay.
It's from Protestant Youth Information in Germany. And I've got a question to you, Grace, as well. You were delivering in your speech at the plenary just now a kind of, if I may say so, a poisoned encouragement that Brexit might not be the worst challenge that Europe is facing. And while this may be true for the European Union and Europe at large, I think it could still serve as a bad example for the younger generations that a rich country would withdraw somehow from the burden of solidarity in a critical situation. So my question would be, in your church in England, and particularly in the youth work of the Church of England, what kind of possibilities do you see to educate the next post-Brexit generations to be good Europeans also outside the European Union? Thank you.
I have to be very careful here. I think it's not exactly a poison encouragement. I think we voted in the United Kingdom, and we voted not by a huge majority, but clearly to leave the European Union. It is an encouragement that a vote is carried out. That is already an encouragement. And that says, I think, to all generations, get involved. The only people who are entitled to kick the ball, to use a phrase that may be used a lot in the next few weeks, the only people entitled to kick the ball are those who are on the pitch. If you're not voting, you don't count. Your vote will not be counted. 1. 2, the vision for the future. Our unity with other human beings is the call of God in Jesus Christ. It is not set by politicians and treaties. It is far more profound than that. Find what we do to serve the needs of our world, and look to the love of God in Christ to inspire you to do so, and make any sacrifice that is called that will improve the common good. Because in doing so, we will build a new world. I refer you to the wonderful sermon of Bishop Michael Curry at the wedding a couple of weeks ago, 15 days ago. That extraordinary sermon, unlike any other sermon heard at a royal event, where he spoke of the power of love and quoted Martin Luther King in speaking of the power of love to take an old world and make it new. And that is the inspiration we need to find.
We heard about it even in the Republic, like ours.
No? Benoit Lalo from Belgian Catholic Media. Continuing on the first question, the difficult one, and
thank you so much.
I'm sorry. And your second part of the answer, trying to avoid division speech.
Yes.
Speech. But that speech is not going from not existing to at a high level. There is a level in between both. And we learned from German history, Viktor Kempferer, that's in the language, or from Italian thinkers, during Gramsci, that's in cultural behavior. Do churches have to react earlier in the process when it starts and move? Well, it is at a low level that the division is spread, or do they have to wait until it's maybe too late?
I quoted in a tweet recently, in a thing on Twitter, responding to the head of Siemens. Do you remember he did that a couple of weeks ago, 10 days? He did a really powerful thing about hate speech. And I repeated what he'd done because he received a lot of death threats for the head of Siemens for speaking against hate speech, and in a particular context. And I was very struck. I always go back to Pastor Niemöller, who you can probably quote better in German than I can in English. But do you remember that great saying that Pastor Niemöller, I think after the Second World War, said that they came for the communists, and I was not a communist, so I said nothing. And that great, great statement, I think that makes...
For me and with nobody.
And that's why we need to respond quickly. And that's why we need to respond in love. Because let's be honest, Christians have not very often set an example of loving in their speech. We are better at condemning than loving. We've spent more time practicing our skills in condemning than loving. And I think Niemöller put it so beautifully, which is why we respond quickly. We must respond quickly. I entirely agree with you. And before it becomes embedded and acceptable. I find in myself, I'm less shocked by hate speech now than I was 3 or 4 years ago, because in certain places it's going on so much that you just think, oh, it's another one, rather than thinking that is terrible. We must stand up against it.
May I add something?
Please.
For me, it's also a question of our own attitude and our own language. When people are so loud and so angry, I think we have to be calmer and very kind and very friendly. It's a question of love.
It's a question of love.
Because it's a contrast. It's not the same. Doing the same, doing more of the same, isn't a solution at all, I think. It's Paul Watzlawick saying, don't do more of the same if you want to solve the problem. I think we have to find another attitude. In our tradition, it is the old message of love.
It's the old message, and there's a wonderful theologian who I'm just getting to know. I've met him recently, who was born just round here, Miroslav Volf, Dr. Miroslav Volf. He's now in America. And he wrote the most beautiful book called Exclusion and Embrace. He's a very powerful philosopher and theologian. And he talks about, in it, about how you challenge hatred and hate speech. It's a very, very powerful and good book. But he came from the experience of living in this region during the 1990s, of members of his family being killed. And therefore he has lived it as well as thought about it.
With your question, please.
I would be, okay?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you. I will be asking a question in the name of Mr. Apostolowski from the Daily Press Politica.
Could you speak up a tiny bit, please?
Okay.
Sorry, I'm old and deaf.
I'll say it in your now. I will be asking a question in the name of Mr. Apostolowski from the Daily Press Politica. So it's one of the oldest one in our country, in Serbia. So the first question is, it's precedent in Orthodox world to allow any other Christian church, such as Church of England, to have its service in one of the Orthodox temple, like in the building of Patriarchy in Belgrade. So Patriarch Irene and you talk about the exceptional relations between Church of England and Serbian Orthodox Church. What connects them? So that's the question.
It's a really good question. Partly history. I mean, you go back 100 years, and during the First World War, during the Great War, the St. Nikolai came to England and found refuge, and had a huge impact. Some Scottish women set up a hospital for wounded Serbs and those suffering from war in Serbia. And then I think with His Holiness in our meeting yesterday, I was reminded what connects us? Christ connects us.
And another one?
Oh.
Yeah. Well,
you're in charge, not me.
The second one concerns something you said in your answer. Throughout history, Serbia and England have always been on the same side, but since the 1990s, the Serbs felt betrayed by their former allies from the 2 world wars. So, do you think that those feelings are justified because of the things that happened?
I think one of the things I've learned is that we need to be very self-aware when we are asking and answering questions like that. We need first to look into our own hearts. When we look back over events even 20, 30, 40 years ago, where great harm has been done. And the nature of war is always, invariably, injustice. Even where we fight rightly, which sometimes happens. I'm not talking about the 90s, I'm talking about any war.
Yes.
Even when we fight rightly, we do terrible things in war. It's the nature of the cruelty of war. So we have to start by acknowledging that violence within us as human beings. And we have to ask, what will it take to be reconciled? And what it takes is time, a very long time. It takes honest discussion. It takes integrity about our own faults, as well as the faults of the other. It's easy to say, was their fault, it was their fault. They started it. But we have to start with what is within ourselves and say, what will it take for me to learn to forgive those who've harmed me? I know from my personal experience of an event that took place, as it happens, 35 years ago today, the most painful event of my life, that bitterness and hatred is something you have to fight every day. Reconciliation comes at a cost. It is a path of stones and thorns on which we have to sow flowers and roses. It is hard. That's where we have to start.
We have time for one more question, and the gentleman in the back.
Baratto, Instituto Evangelico Radio 1. I have a question for Bishop Voss. I heard your speech in plenary, and especially the first part when you said that the European project was, is, and shall be a project of peace and for peace.
Yes.
And I think that at least in Western Europe, one of our problems is that the word war has no meaning to us. There's nothing in our experience that can give us a hint of what it is really, war. But what I missed in your speech is how can I show the preciousness of something that people take for granted and they don't notice.
I don't know the answer. If I would know, I have given it. I have the same experience as you, that the memory faded away. And I mentioned, although speaking with my political, very aware daughters, I have no chance to give my experience or the experience of my parents or grandparents to the next generation. So I hope we will find other ways to bring the memories to the next generation. I think that without memory, there is no chance of peace in Europe.
I agree, absolutely.
So what President Macron does at the moment, he knows very well we can't do the European project without having the memory of all the pain,
Yes.
of all the cruelty, of all the victims in Europe and far away from Europe because of our sins. And we have to speak about it. But I don't know what the right way is to do. For young people, sometimes they tell me it's really boring because we know it. It's an old history book. It's full of dust. It's not something that is interesting. So maybe we have to find
one thing, and we have the same thing. I would say two things I've done that have been valuable with the next generation. One is to take them to places where war is recent and they get involved in rebuilding. Serve people overseas. Go to the Middle East. Go to Palestine. Go to North Africa. Go to places where people have suffered terribly. hear their stories, sit with them, hear their tears, and be filled with compassion, and then come back and think, what have we that they do not have, that I can get up every morning and get on the bus and go to work or go to school and nobody threatens me. Secondly, teach them the history, the visible history. I took 2 of my children to Auschwitz-Birkenau. It completely changed their lives when they saw. And you go to places like Memorial in Caen and equivalent museums where they brings alive how Europe went mad and killed each other in huge numbers between 1914 and 1945. And you see that, yes, sometimes it was one fault, sometimes it was another. There was great evil done by particular people. We know that. We don't deny that. And Germany has been more honest than most countries in looking back and confessing. And, you know, that took huge courage. But we know the evil of that. But I think they can, it is possible when they see other parts of the world.
Thank you. I think we really need to wrap up because we have the Danube prayer at the river.
No, I have a long-standing tradition. I always keep the microphone.
Thank you.